Get on the ground, or I will put a bullet in your skull. That was the only warning Special Agent Darius Hale received before the cold barrel of a Glock 17 pressed against his temple. It was not a criminal holding the gun. It was a man with a badge. A man who saw a black man in a hoodie near a luxury SUV and decided he was guilty before he even stepped out of his patrol car. What Officer Trent Harlan did not know was that the man he was about to execute was not a car thief. He was the highest-ranking FBI field operative in the state, and this mistake was about to cost Harlan everything. The rain in Seattle does not wash things clean. It only makes the grime slicker. It was the kind of night where the streetlights reflected off the asphalt like spilled oil. Darius Hale was tired. Not just the physical exhaustion of a double shift, but a bone-deep weariness that came from months undercover infiltrating a trafficking ring in the port of Tacoma. He had spent those long weeks living as Snake, a low-level enforcer with a rap sheet longer than his arm. He had not shaved in weeks. His hair had grown out into unruly twists, and he was wearing a faded, oversized gray hoodie stained with motor oil. To anyone passing by the upscale Whole Foods on West 4th, he looked like trouble. But underneath the grime and the hoodie, Darius was a senior special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He had just debriefed his handlers and was finally heading home to his wife Lena and their 4-year-old daughter. He had stopped at the grocery store for one reason: oat milk. Lena had texted him that they were out, and he would have walked through fire to make sure his little girl had her cereal in the morning. He walked out of the sliding doors, the brown paper bag tucked securely under his arm to shield it from the drizzle. He headed toward his personal vehicle, a brand-new obsidian black Cadillac Escalade. It was his one luxury, bought with the bonus from the Ryko case the year before. He unlocked the car remotely, the lights flashing amber in the gloom. He opened the back door to set the grocery bag down on the seat so it would not tip over. As he leaned in, adjusting the bag, he heard the crunch of tires on wet gravel behind him. It was not a slow roll. It was an aggressive, fast stop. Darius's instincts, honed by 15 years in federal law enforcement, flared. He did not jerk upright. He moved slowly, his hands coming out of the car empty, palms open. He turned his head. A patrol car from the local precinct, Unit 4 Alpha, was parked diagonally behind his Escalade, blocking him in. The spotlight mounted on the pillar blinded him instantly. "Step away from the vehicle," a voice barked over the PA system. It was distorted, but the aggression was clear. Darius squinted against the glare. "I'm just putting groceries in my car, officer," he called out, his voice calm, level, the command voice they taught at Quantico. "I said step away from the damn vehicle, now." The driver's door of the cruiser flew open. A figure stepped out into the rain. Officer Trent Harlan was a man who wore his uniform like a costume of authority. He was broad-shouldered, thick-necked, with a buzz cut that was a week past regulation. He had a reputation in the precinct, though Darius did not know it yet. Harlan was known as the Hammer by his buddies in the locker room, because to him, everyone he met on the street looked like a nail. Harlan already had his hand on his holster. He did not see a tired father getting milk. He saw a black man in a dirty hoodie leaning into a $90,000 car in a neighborhood he clearly did not belong in. "Officer," Darius said, keeping his hands visible at shoulder height, "my ID is in my front pocket. I am the owner of this vehicle. If you let me—" "Shut your mouth!" Harlan screamed, closing the distance between them with surprising speed. "You think I'm stupid? You think I don't know a smash and grab when I see one? Get your hands on the hood. Now." Darius assessed the situation. He was armed. His service weapon, a Sig Sauer P226, was in a holster at the small of his back, concealed by the hoodie. If he reached for his wallet, Harlan might see the print of the gun and fire. If he did not comply, Harlan might fire anyway. "Officer, listen to me carefully," Darius said, lowering his hands slowly toward the hood of the Escalade. "I am armed. I have a badge. I am a federal agent." Harlan let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Yeah, right. And I'm the King of England. I know your type. Always got a story. You're armed? Good. Give me a reason." Harlan was not listening. He was escalating. He was operating on adrenaline and prejudice, a dangerous cocktail. He grabbed Darius by the shoulder of his hoodie and slammed him hard against the side of the Escalade. The impact rattled Darius's teeth. The paper bag in the back seat tipped over, and the carton of oat milk burst, leaking white liquid onto the pristine leather. "There is no need for this," Darius said through gritted teeth, fighting the urge to use a Krav Maga disarm maneuver that would have snapped Harlan's wrist in 2 seconds. "Check the plates. Run the tag. It comes back to me." "I don't need to run nothing," Harlan hissed, leaning in close. He smelled of stale coffee and peppermint tobacco. "I caught you in the act. You're going downtown. And if you twitch, you're going to the morgue." Harlan kicked Darius's legs apart, patting him down aggressively. His hand brushed the hard lump at the small of Darius's back. Harlan froze. "Gun!" he screamed, stumbling back and ripping his own weapon from its holster. "He's got a gun!" The atmosphere in the parking lot shifted from tense to lethal in a heartbeat. Officer Trent Harlan did not just draw his weapon. He panicked. He leveled his Glock 17 at Darius's chest, his finger already curling around the trigger guard. His breathing was ragged, hyperventilating. This was the most dangerous type of cop, scared, incompetent, and eager to prove he was in control. "Don't you move! Don't you move a muscle!" Harlan shrieked. His voice cracked. Darius froze. He stood perfectly still against his car, the rain plastering the hoodie to his skin. He looked directly down the barrel of the gun. He could see the rifling inside. He could see the tremor in Harlan's hand. "Officer," Darius said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly calm. "My weapon is holstered. My hands are in the air. You are pointing a loaded firearm at a federal agent. You are making a mistake that you cannot undo." "Shut up! Get on your knees!" Harlan roared. "Hands behind your head. Interlace your fingers. Do it!" The commotion had drawn attention. Shoppers pushing carts stopped in their tracks. A woman in a raincoat gasped and pulled her phone out. A security guard from the store, an older man named Earl who had known peace for most of his shift, came jogging out, his eyes wide. "Hey, what's going on here?" Earl shouted, keeping a safe distance. "Back off!" Harlan swung the gun wildly toward the security guard before snapping it back to Darius. "This suspect is armed and dangerous. Call 911. Get back up." Darius seized the moment of distraction. "My badge is in my left front pocket. It's a bifold leather case. It has a gold shield and FBI credentials. If you look at it, we can end this." "You reach for that pocket and you die," Harlan spat. "I know the drill. You go for the wallet. You pull a piece. I ain't falling for it." "I'm not reaching," Darius said. "I'm telling you to check it. You're the one holding the gun." Harlan was sweating now despite the cold rain. He felt the eyes of the crowd on him. He needed to assert dominance. He needed to humiliate this man to justify his own fear. "Get on the ground," Harlan ordered. "Face down in the mud, now." Darius did not move. He knew that if he went to the ground, he gave up all leverage. If he went prone, Harlan could claim he reached for his waistband. He had to stay upright. He had to stay visible to the cameras he knew were now recording from the crowd. "I am not getting on the ground," Darius stated. "I am complying with your order to keep my hands up. I am identifying myself as a federal officer. Dispatch a supervisor immediately." "You don't give orders here, boy," Harlan snapped, the racial slur slipping out with venomous ease. The crowd gasped. The phones were definitely recording now. Harlan realized he had slipped. Anger flushed his face red. He stepped closer, abandoning cover, closing the distance to striking range. It was a tactical error, but his ego was driving the car now. "I gave you a lawful order," Harlan growled, raising the gun so it was aimed directly at Darius's forehead. Last warning. Darius looked into Harlan's eyes. They were dilated, glassy. The man was on a power trip so intense it was like a narcotic high. Officer 4 Alpha, Darius said, reading the unit number on the cruiser. My name is Special Agent Darius Hale. My badge number is 8940. I report directly to Assistant Director Hayes. If you pull that trigger, there won't be a hole deep enough for you to hide in. Liar! Harlan screamed. He was shaking now. He could not reconcile the image of the thug in the hoodie with the articulate, authoritative voice coming out of him. It broke his worldview, and instead of accepting it, he rejected it with violence. Harlan lunged forward and pistol-whipped Darius across the face. Crack! The steel barrel struck Darius's cheekbone, splitting the skin instantly. Blood sprayed onto the wet asphalt. Darius's head snapped back, stars exploding in his vision. He staggered, catching himself against the escalade, but he did not drop his hands. He did not fight back. He knew that one defensive move would be Harlan's excuse to unload the clip. "Stop it! You can't do that!" a woman in the crowd screamed. "He didn't do anything!" another man shouted. "Back the hell up!" Harlan waved the gun at the crowd again. He resisted. You all saw it. He resisted. Darius spit, blood, onto the pavement. He felt the warm trickle running down his neck into his hoodie. The pain was sharp, clarifying. The fear was gone. Now there was only cold, calculated rage. That, Darius whispered, staring at Harlan with eyes like flint, was assault on a federal officer. That's a 10-year mandatory minimum sentence. "I'm cuffing you," Harlan panted. He holstered his weapon aggressively, but did not secure the strap, grabbing his handcuffs instead. He grabbed Darius's wrist and twisted it behind his back with unnecessary force, wrenching the shoulder socket. Click. The first cuff went on. "You like that?" Harlan sneered, tightening it until it cut into the skin. "You like playing tough guy? Let's see how tough you are in the holding cell." Just as Harlan reached for the second hand, a siren wailed. Not the standard yelp of a patrol car, but the deep, guttural rumble of a high-performance engine. Tires screeched as a black Chevy Tahoe tore into the parking lot, hopping the curb and scattering wet mulch. Blue and red strobe lights flashed from the grille, the visor, the mirrors. It was not a standard police unit. It was an unmarked command vehicle. 2 more cars followed, standard cruisers, but they were driving fast. Urgent. Harlan looked up, confused. "About time backup got here," he muttered, yanking Darius's arm again. "Hey, over here, I got the perp secured." The door of the black Tahoe flew open before the car even fully stopped. A tall man with silver hair, wearing a trench coat over a suit, stepped out. He did not look like a beat cop. He looked like authority personified. It was Police Chief Marcus Voss. And behind him, jumping out of the other cruisers, were not just patrol officers. There were 4 men in tactical vests with FBI emblazoned on the back in bold yellow letters. Harlan blinked, the rain dripping into his eyes. "Chief," he stammered. "Chief, I got him." He was resisting. "He's got a gun." Chief Voss did not look at Harlan. He looked at the man bleeding against the escalade with one hand cuffed. He looked at the face of the man who had been his liaison on the Joint Terrorism Task Force for 3 years. Voss's face went pale, then turned a shade of purple that terrified his subordinates. "Officer Harlan!" Voss roared, his voice booming across the parking lot like thunder. "Take your hands off him. Step away from that man immediately." Harlan froze, the key to the cuffs in his hand. "But Chief, he's a suspect. He's armed." One of the FBI tactical agents raised an AR-15, aiming it squarely at Harlan's chest. "Drop the cuffs, Harlan. Hands in the air. Do it now." The world seemed to tilt on its axis for Trent Harlan. The hunter had just become the prey. For a terrifying 3 seconds, Officer Trent Harlan did not move. His brain was misfiring, unable to process the contradiction before him. In his world, He was the law. He was the predator. But the red laser dot dancing on his chest from the FBI agent's rifle said otherwise. I said drop the weapon and get on your knees. The FBI tactical lead, a man named Agent Brennan, who had worked with Darius for a decade, screamed the order. His voice was not a request. It was a promise of violence. Harlan's hand shook violently. The handcuffs dangled from his fingers, clinking against his belt. I'm a police officer. He's the suspect. He's armed. Last chance, Brennan roared, stepping forward, his boots splashing heavily in the puddles. Chief Voss broke the paralysis. He lunged forward, not caring about protocol, driven by sheer fury and the nightmare of the PR disaster unfolding before him. He grabbed Harlan by the collar of his tactical vest and yanked him backward. "You idiot!" Voss shouted, spitting in Harlan's face. "Drop it!" Harlan stumbled, his Glock clattering onto the wet asphalt. Before the gun even stopped sliding, 2 FBI agents were on him. They did not treat him with professional courtesy. They did not give him the brother-in-blue treatment. One agent kicked Harlan's legs out from under him, sending him crashing face first into the gravel, the exact spot where he had tried to force Darius. "Oof!" Harlan grunted as the wind left his lungs. A heavy knee pressed into the back of his neck, pinning his face into the mud. His arms were wrenched behind his back, far past the point of comfort, and he felt the cold bite of steel cuffs. Not his own cuffs. Federal cuffs. "Officer Trent Harlan, you are under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon on a federal officer, and deprivation of rights under color of law, and false imprisonment." Agent Brennan recited the rights, his voice cold as ice. Harlan writhed, mud coating his lips. "What? Federal officer? You guys are crazy. He's a thug in a hoodie." "Shut your mouth," Brennan barked, hauling Harlan up by his biceps. He dragged the stunned officer over to the hood of the chief's Tahoe. Meanwhile, Chief Voss rushed to Darius. The chief looked stricken. He saw the blood dripping from Darius's chin, staining the gray hoodie crimson. He saw the swelling already closing Darius's left eye. God dare, I am so sorry," Voss stammered, his hands hovering, unsure if he should touch the wounded agent. "I didn't know it was you. Dispatch just said, God." Darius stood straight despite the dizziness swimming in his head. He did not look at Voss. He looked at the junior officer, who was now trembling as he unlocked the handcuff from Darius's right wrist. "Easy," Darius told the junior officer, his voice raspy. "Don't shake. Just turn the key." The cuff clicked open. Darius rubbed his wrist, the skin raw and red. He turned to Voss. The friendship they had shared over beers at the FOP lodge was gone. In its place was the cold, hard distance of a professional who had been betrayed. "You have a rogue element, Chief," Darius said quietly. The quietness was worse than shouting. "He profiled me. He assaulted me. He almost executed me in a parking lot over a carton of oat milk." "I know," Voss said, wiping rain from his face. "I know. We'll handle it internally. No," Darius cut him off. "There will be no internal affairs investigation where he gets paid administrative leave for 6 months while you sweep this under the rug. This is a federal crime scene now. That man," Darius pointed a steady finger at Harlan, who was being shoved into the back of the FBI SUV, "assaulted a senior special agent. The Bureau is taking jurisdiction." Harlan, still struggling in the back of the SUV, heard this. He pressed his face against the window, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrible realization. Senior Special Agent. The words echoed in his skull. Darius reached into his sodden pocket and pulled out his badge case. He flipped it open. The gold shield gleamed under the strobing police lights. He held it up for the crowd, for the cameras, and finally he walked over to the window where Harlan sat. He held the badge up to the glass. "Take a good look, Harlan," Darius said, his voice audible even through the glass. "You wanted to see my ID? Here it is." Harlan slumped back in the seat, all the color draining from his face. He looked like a child who had just realized he had broken something irreplaceable. "Medical is en route," Agent Brennan said, stepping up to Darius. "Dare, you're bleeding pretty bad. That cheek looks fractured." "I'm fine," Darius said, though he swayed slightly. "Secure the scene. I want his body cam footage pulled immediately before it accidentally gets corrupted. I want the dash cam from his cruiser, and I want the security tapes from Whole Foods." "Already on it," Brendan nodded. "We're locking it all down." Darius looked around the parking lot. The crowd had grown. People were cheering. A young black teenager in a varsity jacket was filming, his phone held high. Darius met the kid's eyes and nodded. The kid nodded back, a look of respect and vindication on his face. For Darius, the physical pain was secondary. The real pain was knowing that if he had not been who he was, if he had been a teacher, a mechanic, or just a father without a badge, he would likely be dead right now, and Harlan would have gotten a medal for it. That thought hardened his heart into diamond. He was not going to let this go. He was going to burn Harlan's career to the ground, and then he was going to salt the earth. Later, the adrenaline had faded, replaced by the throbbing ache of a fractured zygomatic arch. Darius sat in the observation room of the FBI field office on 3rd Avenue. He had refused to go to the hospital until he saw Harlan processed. A paramedic had butterfly bandaged the cut on his cheek and given him an ice pack, which he held against his face. Through the one-way mirror, he watched Trent Harlan. The former officer looked small in the metal chair. They had taken his uniform. He was wearing an orange federal jumpsuit now, stripping him of the psychological armor the badge had provided. His hands were cuffed to the table. Agent Brennan and the assistant director of the Seattle field office, Corinne Hayes, were in the room with him. This was not a standard interrogation. This was a dismantling. "I have a right to my union rep," Harlan muttered, staring at the table. "I have a right to counsel." "Your lawyer is on the way," Director Hayes said. She was a woman of few words, known for her terrifying competency. "But your union rep? He's not coming." Harlan looked up, startled. "What?" "The union always comes. They have to." "They watched the body cam footage, Trent," Hayes said, dropping a tablet onto the metal table with a clatter. "We sent it over as a courtesy." The rep called back 5 minutes later. He said, and I quote, "We cannot defend indefensible conduct that violates the core tenets of law enforcement. You're on your own." It was a lie, or at least a manipulation. The union would eventually send someone, but in that moment, it shattered Harlan's hope. The blue wall of silence had not just cracked, it had evaporated. "I thought he was reaching for a gun," Harlan pleaded, his voice cracking. It was dark. He was wearing a hoodie. He fit the description of a suspect for a 211 in the area. "A 211? Brennan raised an eyebrow. "Robbery?" "We checked the logs, Harlan. The only robbery reported in that district was days ago." The suspect was a 6-foot white male with a neck tattoo. Agent Hale is black, 5'10", and has no tattoos. Try again. I sensed a threat," Harlan stammered. "He was aggressive. He refused to comply." "We have the audio," Brennan said, leaning in. He identified himself 3 times. He offered to show ID. He kept his hands visible. "The only aggression came from you. You pistol-whipped a man who was standing still." Darius watched from the other side of the glass. He felt a vibration in his pocket. It was his wife, Lena. He had not told her yet. He texted back, "Working late. Unexpected case. Love you." He could not let her see him like this yet. Inside the interrogation room, the pressure was mounting. "Let's talk about your history, Trent," Director Hayes said, opening a thick file. "Because once we took jurisdiction, we got access to everything. Not just the active complaints, but the ones your sergeant buried." Harlan swallowed hard. "I don't know what you're talking about." 16 excessive force complaints in 4 years, Hayes read, flipping pages. "You broke the arm of a college student for resisting during a traffic stop. The dashcam malfunctioned. You tasered a grandmother, because she didn't exit her vehicle fast enough. Settlement paid by the city. Hayes looked up, her eyes hard. You've cost the taxpayers of Seattle $2 million in settlements, Trent, but you never faced charges because you always claimed officer safety. You always hid behind the badge. But today you assaulted a federal agent, and under 18 U.S. Code, Section 111, the penalty for assault with a deadly weapon on a federal officer is up to 20 years. Harlan began to weep. It was not a cry of remorse. It was the selfish, ugly crying of a bully who realizes the teacher is finally watching. I didn't know, Harlan sobbed. I swear to God, if I knew he was a Fed, I would have let him go. I just thought he was some nobody. In the observation room, Darius closed his eyes. That was it, the confession. Brennan slammed his hand on the table, making Harlan jump. And that is exactly the problem. You thought he was a nobody, so you thought you could crush him. You thought his rights didn't matter because he wasn't wearing a suit. You only respect the power that can hurt you. Brennan stood up and walked to the door. We're done here. Book him. No bail. He's a flight risk and a danger to the community. As Brennan and Hayes exited the room, leaving Harlan sobbing alone in the cold fluorescent light, they entered the observation deck. You heard that? Hayes asked Darius. Loud and clear, Darius said, standing up. The ice pack was warm now. He admitted he profiles based on perceived status. It's a civil rights violation on top of the assault. We're going to throw the book at him, Dare, Hayes promised. But there's something else. What? The chief is in the lobby, Hayes said grimly. And the mayor is on the phone. The video from the parking lot, the teenager's video, it's gone viral. 2 million views in an hour. Justice for Dare is trending. The city is about to explode. Darius walked to the window of the office, looking out at the rainy Seattle skyline. He had wanted to go home. He had wanted to drink oat milk and read a bedtime story. Instead, he had become a symbol. Let the chief in, Darius said, turning back to them. I have a few conditions if he wants to keep his city from burning down tonight. The door opened and Chief Voss walked in. He looked 10 years older than he had in the parking lot. He held his hat in his hands. Agent Hale, Voss said, his voice humble. Dare. The mayor wants a joint press conference to show unity, to show that justice is being served. Darius looked at the chief. He thought about Harlan's words. I just thought he was some nobody. I'll do the press conference, Darius said slowly. But not for you, and not for the mayor. Name your terms, Voss said. 1, Darius said, ticking off a finger. Harlan is fired, not suspended. Fired, effective immediately, publicly. Done, Voss nodded instantly. 2, Darius continued. You reopen every single excessive force complaint against him, every settlement, and you let the FBI Civil Rights Division audit them. Voss hesitated. That would expose the department's negligence. It would ruin careers. But he looked at Darius's swollen face and nodded. Okay, done. And 3. Darius stepped closer, entering the chief's personal space. You are going to stand at that podium, and you are going to admit that your officer profiled me. You aren't going to say it was a misunderstanding. You aren't going to say errors were made. You are going to say he targeted a black man because of his bias, and the only reason I'm alive is because I had a badge of my own. Voss paled. Dare, that's political suicide. The union will eat me alive. Then get out of my office, Darius said, turning his back, and I'll give my own press conference. There was a long silence in the room. The hum of the server banks was the only sound. Finally, Voss sighed, a sound of defeat. Fine, I'll say it. I'll say it all. Darius nodded. The first round of karma had been delivered. Harlan was in a cell. The department was bending the knee. But Darius knew the fight was not over. The court case would be brutal. Harlan's lawyers would try to dig up dirt on Darius's undercover work to discredit him, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. Darius Hale had spent his life hunting monsters in the dark, A dirty cop in a bright courtroom? That was light work. "Get me a fresh shirt," Darius said to Brennan. "I have a statement to make." The wheels of justice turned slowly, but the court of public opinion spins at the speed of light. In the weeks following the arrest, the narrative began to shift. It started in the dark corners of the internet, forums and social media groups dedicated to backing the blue at any cost. A GoFundMe page for Trent Harlan raised $250,000 in 3 days. The description painted him as a decorated veteran officer who was being railroaded by the woke federal government for doing his job in a high-crime area. Then came the lawyer. Robert "the Shark" Langley, no relation to Darius, was a high-priced defense attorney from Chicago who specialized in getting dirty cops off the hook. He arrived in Seattle wearing a 3-piece suit that cost more than Harlan made in a year. He did not care about the truth. He cared about the narrative, and he knew exactly how to dismantle Darius Hale. The strategy was simple: dirty the victim. It began one morning, weeks after the incident. Darius was at home, still on medical leave while his cheekbone healed, helping his daughter Lila tie her shoes for preschool. The TV was on in the background, tuned to the local news. "Breaking news," the anchor announced. Sources close to the investigation allege that the FBI agent at the center of the viral parking lot arrest, Darius Hale, has a history of violence and was actually the subject of an internal conduct review. Darius froze. Lena, his wife, walked into the room with a cup of coffee, her eyes glued to the screen. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. The screen showed a grainy photo of Darius from his undercover operation, the snake persona. He looked menacing, unshaven, dealing with a known cartel member. The context was missing. To the average viewer, it just looked like Darius was a criminal. "They leaked the undercover file," Darius whispered, a cold pit forming in his stomach. "That's classified. Someone in the precinct leaked it to the press to make me look like a thug." The news report continued. Robert the Shark appeared on the courthouse steps, microphone in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he smiled smoothly. "My client, Officer Harlan, is a hero. He recognized a dangerous individual. We have reason to believe Agent Hale was acting erratically, perhaps even under the influence, which is why he refused to comply. We will prove that Officer Harlan was merely following his training to neutralize a perceived threat. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. Within hours, the narrative split the city. Half the people saw a racist attack. The other half saw a misunderstood cop dealing with a suspect-turned federal agent. Darius's phone began to ring. It was Assistant Director Hayes. "Dare, don't watch the news," Hayes said, her voice tight. "Too late," Darius replied. "They're using Snake against me." "We know. We're tracing the leak. But Dare, it gets worse." The defense filed a motion to dismiss based on qualified immunity and reasonable fear. The judge assigned to the case is Judge Whitaker. He's old school, very pro-police. "So Harlan walks?" Darius asked, his grip tightening on the phone until the plastic creaked. "Not if we can help it. But the trial is going to be a bloodbath. They are going to put you on trial, Dare. They're going to drag your undercover work, your use of force reports, everything into the light. They want to make the jury fear you more than they hate Harlan." Darius looked at his daughter, who was happily oblivious, playing with her backpack straps. He realized this was not just about him anymore. It was about whether the truth mattered at all. That afternoon, Darius went back to the office, ignoring the reporters camping on his lawn. He met Brennan in the war room. The walls were covered with timelines and evidence. "We need more," Darius said, staring at Harlan's mugshot. "The assault charge is solid, but with this lawyer and this judge, he might get off with probation and a slap on the wrist. We need to bury him." "We audited his files," Brennan said, rubbing his temples. "We found the excessive force complaints. It shows a pattern, but the defense will argue those are just complaints from criminals." Darius narrowed his eyes. "Go deeper." Harlan was terrified when I said I was a Fed, more terrified than a cop should be just for making a bad stop. He was shaking. Why? Maybe he knew he screwed up. No. Darius shook his head. He acted like he was caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Look at the location. Whole Foods parking lot. Upscale area. Why was he there? His patrol zone is 4 miles east. He was out of sector. Brennan typed on his keyboard. You're right. GPS puts him way out of bounds. He didn't call it in either. I was hunting, Darius murmured. But not for a robber. Check his financials. Check his phone records. Not the department phone. The burner. We didn't find a burner on him. Every dirty cop has a burner, Darius said. Check the dashcam footage again. The minutes before he pulled up on me. What was he doing? Brennan pulled up the video file. They watched the grainy footage of the rainy streets. Harlan was parked in an alleyway for 20 minutes before driving to the grocery store. He seemed to be waiting. Then he made a call. But the audio from the cruiser did not pick up the other side of the conversation because Harlan had turned on the AM radio to mask it. I was meeting someone, Darius said, or waiting for a drop. Dare, Brennan said slowly, zooming in on the video. Look at the timestamp, just before he came to you. Yeah. Look at the car passing the alley. Brennan pointed to a blur on the screen. That's a black Escalade, just like yours. Darius felt a chill. He didn't stop me because of a 211 robbery. He stopped me because he thought I was someone else, someone in a black Escalade. If we can find out who he thought you were, Brennan said, a grin slowly spreading across his face, then we don't just have a racist cop. We have a corrupt one, and the shark won't be able to spin that. Get the license plate reader data for that intersection, Darius ordered. Find every black Escalade that passed through there in that window. We're going to find Harlan's real target. The counterattack had begun. The trial of United States versus Trent Harlan began under a cloud of heavy security. The federal courthouse was surrounded by protesters, one side chanting Black Lives Matter, the other holding Blue Lives Matter signs. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Inside, courtroom 4B was packed. Darius sat at the prosecution table next to the U.S. attorney, a sharp woman named Audrey Brennan. On the defense side, Trent Harlan sat wearing a modest sweater and glasses, looking like a high school librarian. Beside him, Robert the Shark Langley looked confident, practically preening for the jury. The first 2 days were brutal. The defense hammered Darius during cross-examination. Agent Hale, the Shark paced back and forth. Is it true that in your role as Snake, you hospitalized 2 men in a bar fight? I was maintaining cover. They attacked me, Darius replied calmly. So you are capable of extreme violence when you feel threatened. I am capable of self-defense. And isn't it true, the Shark leaned in, that when Officer Harlan approached you, you were still decompressing from this violent persona? That you might have projected an attitude of hostility? I was buying milk, Darius said flatly. I identified myself. So you say. The Shark dismissed him. But Officer Harlan saw a threat. He saw a man who fits the profile of a violent offender. The jury looked conflicted. The defense was successfully muddying the waters, making it a he said, she said regarding the tone of the encounter. But on the 3rd day, the prosecution played their trump card. Audrey Brennan stood up. Your Honor, the prosecution calls Special Agent Brennan to the stand, and we introduce new evidence marked Exhibit G. The Shark stood up immediately. Objection. New evidence? We haven't seen this. It was discovered and processed yesterday, Your Honor, Brennan said coolly. Relevant to motive. Judge Whitaker, intrigued, allowed it. Agent Brennan took the stand. He looked tired, but triumphant. He plugged a laptop into the courtroom's presentation system. Agent Brennan, Audrey asked, can you explain what we are looking at? This, Brennan pointed to the screen, is a timeline of Officer Harlan's movements on the night of the incident. As you can see, he was 4 miles out of his patrol zone. Did he have a reason to be there? He claimed he was patrolling for a robbery suspect, but we pulled the automated license plate reader data for the intersection of 4th and Main. A spreadsheet appeared on the screen. At that window, Brennan explained, a black Cadillac Escalade passed the intersection. It was registered to a man named Dominic "Dom" Calder, a known mid-level distributor for the Seattle crime syndicate. The courtroom murmured. Harlan shifted in his seat, his librarian facade cracking. And shortly after, Brennan continued, Agent Hale's black Escalade passed the same spot. Both cars are identical. Both drivers were wearing hoodies. But there is one difference. And what is that? Dominic Calder, Brennan said, looking directly at Harlan, was carrying $50,000 in cash that night for a supply run. We know this because we arrested Calder days ago on unrelated charges, and he gave us interesting information. The shark was on his feet. Objection, hearsay. It's not hearsay if we have the digital footprint, Brennan shot back. He clicked a button. Audio filled the courtroom. It was not from a wiretap. It was a voicemail. Yo, Dom, it's Harlan. I'm at the spot. I know you're coming through tonight with the package. You're gonna pay the toll, or you're gonna have a bad night. Don't make me use the lights. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Harlan's face turned the color of old ash. The shark stopped mid-objection, his mouth hanging open. He looked at his client, realizing he had not just been defending a racist cop. He had been defending a shaking-down gangster with a badge. We recovered this voicemail from Calder's phone, Brennan stated. Officer Harlan wasn't profiling Agent Hale because he thought he was a robber. He profiled him because he thought he was a drug dealer he could rob. He saw a black man in a nice car and assumed it was his target, Calder. He pulled him over to steal $50,000, but he made a mistake. Audrey Brennan turned to the jury. He pulled over the FBI instead. Pandemonium broke out. The judge banged his gavel furiously. Order! Order in this court! Harlan was not looking at the jury anymore. He was looking at the table, his hands shaking uncontrollably. The narrative of the hero cop was incinerated in seconds. He was not a protector. He was a highwayman. The shark sat down slowly, closing his folder. He knew it was over. He whispered something to Harlan, likely telling him to prepare for prison. But the hard karma was not done yet. We have one more witness, Your Honor, Audrey said, twisting the knife. A rebuttal witness to the defense's claim of Harlan's exemplary character. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. An older black woman walked in using a cane. She walked with dignity, though her steps were slow. It was Mrs. Harlan, Trent Harlan's own mother. The courtroom gasped. Even Darius was surprised. He looked at Agent Brennan, who gave a small, grim nod. She took the stand, refusing to look at her son. Mrs. Harlan, Audrey asked softly, you approached the FBI voluntarily, is that correct? Yes, ma'am, she said, her voice shaking but clear. Why? Because, she looked at Trent, tears streaming down her face. I raised him better, but I watched him change. I watched him bring home money he shouldn't have. TVs, jewelry. I asked him where it came from. He told me to shut up. Objection. Familial privilege, the shark tried, but it was weak. She is volunteering the information, the judge ruled. Overruled. He called them thugs, Mrs. Harlan wept. He said they didn't deserve what they had. He said he was just taxing them. But then I saw the video. I saw him put a gun to that man's head. That man who was just buying milk for his baby. She took a deep breath. My father was a police officer. My grandfather was a police officer. They wore the badge with honor. My son, he disgraced them. He disgraced us all. I'm here because if I don't speak the truth, God will not forgive me. Harlan broke. He put his head in his hands and sobbed. Loud, ugly, heaving sobs. It was not the tactical crying of the interrogation room. This was the sound of a man whose soul had just been laid bare by the one person who was supposed to love him unconditionally. Darius watched from the prosecution table. He did not feel triumph. He felt a heavy, somber satisfaction. This was the twist. The blue wall had not destroyed Harlan. His own greed and his own mother's conscience had. The jury did not even need to deliberate long, but there was still the sentencing to come. And Darius had one final thing to say to Trent Harlan before he disappeared into the federal prison system forever. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. In a federal case involving civil rights violations and assault on a federal officer, that speed was a message in itself. When the foreman, a middle-aged mechanic with grease under his fingernails, stood up to read the verdict, Trent Harlan did not even stand. He sat slumped in his chair, a broken man who had aged 20 years in 3 months. On the count of assault with a dangerous weapon on a federal officer, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of deprivation of rights under color of law, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of attempted extortion, we find the defendant guilty. The word guilty rang out 7 times. Each one was a hammer blow to the life Trent Harlan had built on corruption and bullying. The blue wall had crumbled. The high-priced lawyer had failed. And the qualified immunity defense had been laughed out of the courtroom. Judge Whitaker, who had been known for decades as a pro-police judge, looked down at Harlan over his spectacles. The revelation of the extortion scheme and the testimony of Harlan's own mother had clearly disgusted him. He was not looking at a police officer anymore. He was looking at a criminal who had stained the badge the judge respected. "Trent Harlan," Judge Whitaker said, his voice gravelly and stern, "you have not only betrayed your oath, but you have also betrayed the trust of every citizen in this city. You used your authority as a weapon to terrorize and to steal. You saw a man you deemed lesser and decided you could destroy him. You were wrong." The judge paused, shuffling the papers on his bench. "The sentencing guidelines for these crimes are severe, but given the betrayal of public trust, I am applying the maximum enhancement. I sentence you to 25 years in a federal correctional institution, no possibility of parole." Harlan let out a strangled sob. 25 years. He would be an old man before he saw the sky without fences again. "And," the judge continued, "I am recommending that you be placed in the general population at USP Lompoc." Harlan's head snapped up, terror flooding his eyes. "Your Honor, no! You can't! I was a cop! They'll kill me in Gen Pop! I need protective custody!" "You were a cop," Judge Whitaker corrected him coldly. "Now you are a convicted felon. And perhaps living among the people you tormented will teach you the empathy you so clearly lacked. Bailiffs, take him away." As the marshals hauled Harlan to his feet, Darius stood up. He walked to the wooden railing that separated the court from the gallery. He needed Harlan to look at him one last time. "Harlan!" Darius called out. Harlan stopped, panting, tears streaming down his face. He looked at the man he had tried to crush in the parking lot. Darius did not gloat. He did not smile. He just leaned in close. "You remember when you told me I was a nobody?" Darius asked softly. "You remember saying you knew a smash and grab when you saw one?" Harlan nodded frantically, desperate for any mercy. "Well," Darius continued, his voice like granite, "you were right about one thing. I was working a case that night. But it wasn't the drug dealers. We were investigating a corruption ring within the precinct. We just didn't know who the ringleader was." Harlan's eyes went wide. "We had the bait car out there," Darius whispered. "We were fishing. And you? You bit the hook so hard you pulled the whole boat down. You didn't just ruin yourself, Trent. You gave us the evidence to indict your sergeant and 3 other officers this morning. You cleaned up the whole department." Harlan looked as if he had been punched in the gut. He had not just been unlucky. He had walked into a trap of his own making. He was the architect of his own destruction. "Enjoy Lompoc," Darius said, turning his back. "I hear the oat milk is terrible." The marshals dragged Harlan away, his wails echoing in the hallway until the heavy oak doors slammed shut. Months later, the rain had stopped in Seattle, replaced by the crisp golden light of early summer. Darius pulled his black Escalade into the driveway of his home. He was not wearing a hoodie today. He was wearing a crisp suit, his gold badge clipped to his belt. He stepped out of the car, grabbing a grocery bag from the passenger seat. He walked up the path, the smell of blooming jasmine filling the air. Lena was on the porch, watching Lila draw with chalk on the driveway. The little girl looked up and squealed, "Daddy!" Darius dropped the bag and caught her as she ran into his arms, swinging her around. Her laughter was the best sound in the world. Better than a guilty verdict. Better than a promotion. "Did you get it?" Lena asked, smiling as she leaned against the doorframe. "Got it." Darius grinned, reaching into the bag. He pulled out a carton of premium oat milk. "And I didn't even get arrested this time." Lena laughed and kissed him. "That's progress." They walked inside together, leaving the world outside. The nightmare in the parking lot was a scar now, not a wound. It had healed, but the city had changed. The story of the racist cop versus the FBI agent had become a legend in Seattle. The precinct had been overhauled. Body cams were now mandatory and strictly monitored. The blue wall was thinner, more transparent, and somewhere in a cell in California, Trent Harlan was sitting on a metal bunk, staring at a blank concrete wall. He had lost his freedom, his reputation, and his future. All because he judged a book by its cover and did not realize that the man in the hoodie was the one holding the pen. Justice had not just been blind, it had been patient, and when it finally struck, it did not miss. Darius poured a glass of milk for his daughter, watching the white liquid swirl in the cup. He took a sip of his coffee and looked out the window at his peaceful street. "Daddy, are you a superhero?" Lila asked, wiping a milk mustache from her lip. Darius smiled, looking at his badge on the counter. "No, baby," he said softly. "I'm just a guy who stood his ground, and sometimes that's enough." And that is the story of how one arrogant officer learned the hardest lesson of his life. Never judge a person by their appearance, because you never know who you're really dealing with. Officer Harlan thought he had the power, but he forgot that true power does not come from a badge or a gun. It comes from integrity. In the end, his own prejudice was the trap that cost him everything, proving that karma might be slow, but it always arrives with interest. What would you have done if you were in Agent Hale's shoes? Would you have kept your cool, or would you have fought back right there in the parking lot? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.